Hello Internet. Today I'm going to show you how I went about fixing this 5090 that came in for repair. The guy said that it was not posting after putting it in the water block. Now, I couldn't find any issues that would immediately be related to the water block, but one of the interesting issues, and the whole reason why I'm doing this video is because the issue was rather interesting, was that it had all the voltages except one. As many of you may already know, 5090s brought back MSVDD. MSVDD are a separate power stage that a power phase that powers the core. Because the core is powered by MSVDD, we have the NVVDD, and obviously the memory. The memory phase does not power just the memory chip, it also powers the memory controller inside the core and a whole bunch of memory related things. Regardless, it was a bit simpler with the 4090s. The 4090s did not have MSVDD, but this one does. Forget about the MSVDD. Problem was, I was missing the voltage on the core, specifically NVVDD, while everything else was present, including PEX, somehow. So, and the board was pulling about 2 amps, and that was a dead giveaway. Usually, a board like this would just pull like 3 and a jump from 3 to 5 just kind of randomly. And so I started poking around, and first suspect would be this. I thought maybe there's a physical damage on the board, but I couldn't find anything. So I started looking into this one little chip. And what's annoying about these boards is that this one little chip controls every single phase on the board. It controls MSVDD, it controls NVVDD, it controls memory, everything. This is crazy. Whereas before, under normal circumstances, you would have a dedicated chip that would control MSVDD and NVVDD, and then a separate chip that would control the memory. Until to this day, everything worked fine. And I'm not saying there's a problem with this particular version of the GPU. All I'm saying is just too many things just crammed into one chip just kind of complicates the diagnostic process. Because if something goes wrong, it's kind of easier to narrow the problem down when the problem area is very specific to a specific chip on the board. So, but in this case, all of them were here. And the traditional power sequence all of a sudden doesn't make a whole lot of sense. So what I ended up doing is, thankfully, we have a board view for this thing. Otherwise, it would be a long day. And I started tracing the enable signal for the NVVDD. Now, mind you, as I already said, this one little chip controls 3 different types of phases: MSVD, NVVDD, and the memory. So we were missing NVVDD. So I had to find the enable pin for the NVVDD. Then I take my good old trusty multimeter, and the enable signal was coming into this resistor, I believe. Yeah, it goes into here. And when I power the board, it does not short, which means the controller does not short the enable. In the previous generations of, or maybe cheaper versions of 5090s that do not utilize this latest and greatest MPS controller, they would usually pull NVVDD output enable signal to the ground, and that happens by it does that by the controller itself. But in this case, it does not happen. The controller doesn't do that in this particular case situation. So I measure this, and then I basically started following. Let me go and switch over to the desktop. I basically started following this resistor here. So we don't have these 2 resistors on the board, and we can look at the net, see where that goes. Chip, so that goes to the chip, and the ferrite capacitor. So we don't have these 2. Oh, so the only thing that I have here is this resistor. That's a 0 ohm. I checked that. It was indeed 0 ohm. Then we click here, and then we follow where that resistor goes. That resistor goes all the way to the bottom of the board. Let me go and show it to you. So that goes all the way to the bottom of the C. Right? I think it goes right here. Yep. And so that resistor happened to be an output. It's a 0 ohm resistor that's, as you can see here, linked directly to the output of this U gate. Now, on this U gate, there's a VCC voltage. And the VCC voltage is the voltage that powers this U gate so that it can do its thing. Now, in order for the U gate to do its thing, which is basically to take voltage from here and pass it down to here, and the amount of voltage that it would pass through will depend on the voltages that it will have on 2 of these enable pins, which means it takes 2 enable pins to be above 1 volt in order for voltage to start passing through. And so then I measured this pin and we had 0 volts on it. So immediately I'm thinking one of the inputs is missing. And obviously the input 2 was missing. And the input 2, or the enable 2, is missing because of this resistor. And that's why I'm doing this video, because this resistor here is more than likely going to give you trouble more than once. And so I'm doing this video so that people who are in this business, if they see 5090 from Gigabyte, whether it's Aorus or Gaming, it will most likely be a problem with this resistor. And so this resistor happens to be 100 freaking kilo ohms, and it's a pull-up resistor to 1.8. What's interesting about this is that this signal here, allow me to be more specific. The second or the middle leg of this U-gate is connected to this resistor here. Allow me to show it to you on the board view. Let's go in here. So in here, this is the output of the U-gate. We had 0. So because of that, we're checking pin 1 and pin 2, and then as I told you before, it is connected to these 2 pads and basically this resistor here. And as you can see with the markings, this pin here is basically 1.8, and this pin here goes straight under the core into here. And there's absolutely no problem for it to go from here to there. The problem here is, for whatever reason, I do not know why that is. The more I think about it, the more I come to possibly false realization or false assumption that maybe the transistor is failing, but it hasn't failed yet. And it's somehow decreasing, and it somehow applies a little bit excessive resistance to internally when it's activated. I do not know. It's just a theory. It checked out. I measured like 40 kilo ohms on this pin, so it's not like it's pulling it low to the ground when it's turned on, and the resistance does not change on that pin when the chip is powered. So the only logical conclusion I've made was this resistor that was supposed to be 100K from the factory went bad. So I removed the resistor and I measured it, and I measured exactly 100K. So then I started thinking, why doesn't it work? And the reason why it doesn't work is because this resistor was calculated too precisely. And that's the topic of this video, basically. When these engineers are sitting there scratching their private areas, thinking that the harder they scratch, the better idea is going to come out of there, and nothing good came out. What we ended up getting with a 100K resistor is we're getting just barely over 1 volt. Now that 1 volt would be there theoretically. In practice, because components degrade, transistors could develop internal resistance as they get turned on, subsequently causing that 100 kilo ohm value being too high. And I think they're counting on it. I think they're counting on the internal resistance of the transistor starting to fail when it's powered, just to basically implement a time bomb on your device so that it would fail in the most invisible way possible. And so what I ended up doing is I just took this 100 and I started experimenting, and I took it down to 80K. I've gained maybe a few millivolts, but in order for the enable to work properly, the voltage has to be at least 1 volt. But it wasn't. It was 0.99 something. It was just under 1 volt. And so with an 80K, I gained maybe a few millivolts, but I was not getting that 1 volt that I was looking for. And so instead of playing around and getting myself exactly 1 volt, so that way my idea would be just as genius as the Gigabyte engineers, I ended up overshooting the voltage by 100 millivolts just to be safe. And so I ended up putting, I think, like 20 some kilo ohm resistor here. And then we're finally getting 1.1 volt on this pin. And so that gives me extra room for this transistor to start developing internal resistance once it's powered. And I have to highlight this point, that the internal resistance of this correct me if I'm wrong, could drop, affecting this resistor's ability to push 1.8 volt into this pin. Now, it does not happen when the transistor is off, but when the transistor is on, it really shouldn't. But for whatever reason, it does. And I think engineers know this. And this wouldn't be the first time I've seen this. So, I am not a transistor expert. I just base my assumptions based on observation and experience. So feel free to give me all your hate and correctional comments in the comment section below. I would appreciate it. Constructive criticism or even non-constructive criticism is a way to learn and better yourself. So with the 1.1 volt instead of exactly 1 volt on this pin, the problem went away. But given the fact that this GPU was installed in a water block, you would have guessed that there were some problems after that, such as crashing right in the middle of installing drivers. And so if you reboot, the system will reboot, but as the moment it gets to a part where the drivers get initialized, it freezes. And so if you use this as a secondary and go into the device manager, the device is listed there with an error code 43. And all of this is funny because with all these problems, well, after I got this NVDD thing fixed, it posted an image and it would get to the installation process of the driver. And only then it would freeze. So, whatever. A bit unusual. I thought I would share. So, and of course, that problem was fixed with nothing other than a reball. So I've already done that, and the GPU is working fine. All I have to do now is to put it all together and run some tests, and hopefully everything goes well. I've already plugged it in, made sure that the drivers will install, and they did. So all I need to do is to assemble and just run some tests. And that would be it for this, not exactly a repair video, more of an education for those who might come across a problem like this. Pretty much any card that you're running into an issue where you're supposed to be hitting over 1 volt in order to enable a transistor somewhere, but you're just not getting that 1 volt. So look no further than the resistor that's connected to it and take it out, measure it, and see if it measured correctly. And if it's measuring correctly, chances are it degraded, I don't know. And replacing that same resistor with the exact same value does not help. Then simply try to lower that value to a point where you start getting your voltages creeping up and just overshoot 1 volt threshold slightly, just like I did here. Maybe instead of shooting straight for 1 volt, go for like a 1.1 or 1.2 at most. You don't want to go too high. I didn't want to go too high on this particular one because that goes into the core. So 1.1 volt, I think, is probably a safe bet that there will be no damage. Alternatively, if the signal isn't connected to the core, then you could overshoot this voltage by way more than just 100 millivolts. So now some of you thinking 100 millivolts overshoot a signal that's going into the core could potentially damage the core. Well, not necessarily. You're probably thinking about the voltages that you adjust the core voltage with. That would be true, but we're not dealing with the voltages that are driving the core, if you know what I mean. We're dealing the voltages that are used for communicating signals back and forth. So that it's basically a 0 and 1 type of voltages. If those voltages overshoot slightly, not a big deal. They're still treated as 1. But if the voltage is undershooting slightly, and it's not 1 volt, but it's like 0.9999, it will be treated as 0. And so in this case, potentially because of the transistor here that's failing, or the issue could be inside of the core that's failing. Hard to say, because the core is a bunch of transistors as well. And given the fact that this card, actually, now that I think about this card, I don't know if you can see this, it's actually covered with like a plasti dip or something. As you can see here, all these black stuff, it's all from coating. So this was probably cooled with liquid nitrogen of some sort, ran some benchmarks and whatnot. I don't know exactly what they did. That wouldn't surprise me if the core internal transistor starting to develop internal resistance problems of its own. So with that said, that will be it for today. Hopefully this was educating. In any case, thank you for watching. Hopefully this was entertaining. I want to go ahead and put this thing together, run some tests, give the customer good news, and that will be it for today. If anybody interested, pads to convert this card from thermal potty into thermal pads. I think I'll post a photo of the measurements on my Discord server so you can grab them there. Or, to simplify it, I will just show it to you on the screen right now. There it is. Take the notes and enjoy. Goodbye.